The clock struck midnight, and the old mansion shuddered as if it had been holding its breath for centuries. The moon, a thin crescent, cast eerie shadows across the cobblestone path leading to the grand oak doors. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of decay and something else, something sweeter, like the perfume of a long-forgotten era. Ella stood at the foot of the stairs, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been one for ghosts or superstitions, but the house seemed to breathe, its creaks and groans echoing through the halls like whispers. The invitation had arrived in the mail that morning, a thick, cream-colored envelope with no return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper, handwritten in elegant script. "Come to the mansion at midnight. The shadows will speak." Ella had laughed at first, dismissing it as a prank. But something about the words lingered in her mind, pulling at her like a siren's call. Now, standing in the dimly lit foyer, she felt a presence watching her, a cold breath on the back of her neck. "Who's there?" she called out, her voice trembling. Silence answered her, but the shadows seemed to shift, as if something was moving just out of sight. Ella took a step forward, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. The house was old, she knew, built in the 1800s by a wealthy merchant who had vanished under mysterious circumstances. Rumors had swirled about the house ever since, whispers of curses, of lost souls trapped within its walls. As she reached the landing, a faint light caught her eye, coming from the study at the end of the hall. The door was slightly ajar, and a soft glow spilled out into the darkness. Ella's curiosity got the better of her, and she moved towards the light, her hand on the doorknob. But before she could enter, the door slammed shut on its own, the sound reverberating through the house like a gunshot. Ella jumped back, her heart racing. The air grew colder, and the shadows seemed to close in around her. "Ella, come closer," a voice whispered, barely audible yet unmistakably real. She turned, her breath caught in her throat. In the mirror across the hall, a figure stood behind her, its face obscured by the darkness. But it was definitely a woman, dressed in a long, flowing dress, her hair cascading down her back like a river of ink. Ella's mouth went dry. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure didn't answer, but the air around Ella grew thick with tension. The mansion seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what came next. And then the lights went out. Ella stood frozen, her heart pounding in her chest. The darkness was complete, save for the faint glow of moonlight filtering through the curtains. She could hear her own breath, ragged and the distant creak of the old house settling. "Ella, I've been waiting for you," the voice whispered again, closer this time, as if the figure in the mirror had moved closer. Ella's hands trembled as she reached for the doorknob, her mind racing. She needed to get out of here, to escape the oppressive atmosphere of the mansion. But as she turned the knob, it wouldn't budge. The door was locked. Panic set in, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. She tried the handle again, but it was useless. The door was sealed shut, as if something, or someone, didn't want her to leave. "Please, let me go," she pleaded, her voice trembling. There was a soft chuckle, a sound that sent shivers down her spine. "You can't leave, Ella. Not yet." The voice was sweet, almost melodic, but there was something sinister beneath it, a hint of madness that made her skin crawl. Ella's eyes darted around the darkened hall, searching for any sign of the figure, but there was nothing. The mansion was silent, save for the sound of her own fear. Suddenly, a faint light flickered on, illuminating the staircase. Ella's heart leaped into her throat as she saw the figure ascending the stairs, its form growing clearer with each step. It was a woman, young and beautiful, her hair cascading down her back like a river of black silk. She wore a dress that seemed to shimmer in the dim light, and her eyes were a deep, unsettling shade of purple, like the night sky on a moonless night. Ella's breath caught in her throat. "Who are you?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. The woman smiled, a sad, sorrowful smile that didn't reach her eyes. "I am the keeper of this house," she said, her voice like a melody. "And you, Ella, are here for a reason." Ella's mind raced, trying to make sense of the situation. She had never been to this house before, had never even heard of it until the mysterious invitation arrived in the mail. But something about the woman's words sent a chill down her spine. "Why me?" Ella asked, her voice shaking. The woman's smile faded and her eyes darkened. "Because you are different, Ella. Because you have the power to see what others cannot." Ella's breath caught in her throat. "See what?" The woman's gaze softened and she took a step closer, her presence filling the hall with an eerie, otherworldly energy. "The shadows," she whispered. "They have been waiting for you." Before Ella could respond, the woman disappeared into the darkness, her presence fading like a wisp of smoke. Ella stood alone in the hall, her heart pounding in her chest. The mansion was silent once more, the only sound the distant creak of the old wooden floors. And then she heard it, a faint whisper like the rustling of leaves in the wind. Come to me." Ella's breath caught in her throat. The whisper was coming from the study, the same room she had tried to enter earlier. She hesitated for a moment, her mind torn between fear and curiosity, and then she took a deep breath and made her way down the hall. The door to the study was still slightly ajar, the faint light spilling out into the darkness. Ella reached for the knob, her hand trembling, and pushed the door open. What she saw inside would forever haunt her. The study was a labyrinth of shadows, the only light coming from a single candle on the desk. The room was filled with old, dusty books, their spines worn and cracked, their pages yellowed with age. In the center of the room, a large oak desk stood, its surface cluttered with papers, quills, and ink pots. And on top of it all, a book, its cover black as night, its pages bound in silver thread. Ella's heart skipped a beat as she stepped into the room, her eyes fixed on the book. It was as if the room had been waiting for her, as if the very air itself was charged with anticipation. "Ella, come closer," the woman's voice whispered, though she was no longer in the room. Ella's breath caught in her throat as she approached the desk, her eyes never leaving the book. It was as if it was calling to her, its presence filling the room with an eerie, almost tangible energy. As she reached out to touch it, the candle on the desk flickered, casting shadows across the walls. The room seemed to hum with energy, the air thick with the scent of old wood and something else. Something sweet, like the perfume of a long-forgotten era. Ella's hand trembled as she lifted the book, its weight surprising her. It was heavy, far heavier than it looked, as if it contained the weight of centuries. The cover was smooth, the silver thread glowing faintly in the dim light. And then she saw it, a word etched into the cover in elegant script. "Whispers." Ella's breath caught in her throat. The word sent a chill down her spine, as if the book itself was alive, as if it held secrets that should never be spoken. "Open it," the woman's voice whispered, though Ella knew she was no longer in the room. Ella hesitated, her mind racing. Something about the book felt wrong, as if it held powers beyond her comprehension. But curiosity got the better of her, and she carefully opened the cover, the pages creaking with age. The first page was blank, save for a single sentence, written in the same elegant script as the cover. "Beware the shadows, for they hold the keys to the unseen." Ella's breath caught in her throat. The words seemed to burn into her mind, their meaning unclear but their significance undeniable. She turned the page, her heart pounding in her chest. The next page was filled with strange symbols, their shapes unfamiliar but their energy palpable. They seemed to pulse with a life of their own, as if they were alive, waiting to be unleashed. And then she saw it, a name written in the corner of the page. Grady Hendrix. Ella's mind went blank. She had never heard of Grady Hendrix, but the name sent a chill down her spine, as if it held some dark, hidden meaning. "Ella, you must read it," the woman's voice whispered, though she was no longer in the room. Ella's breath caught in her throat. She knew she shouldn't, that something about the book was wrong, but curiosity got the better of her. She began to read, her eyes scanning the page, taking in the words one by one. The words were like a drug, pulling her in, filling her mind with images and thoughts that weren't her own. She saw shadows moving in the corners of her vision, heard whispers in the air, voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. And then she felt it, a presence, dark and malevolent, pressing against her mind, filling her with fear and dread. Ella's breath caught in her throat as she tried to stop reading, to close the book and escape the room, but it was too late. The words had taken hold of her, their power overwhelming, their darkness seeping into her soul. The room seemed to spin around her, the shadows closing in, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. "Ella. Oh, Ella." The name echoed through the room, bouncing off the walls like a mantra, a chant that filled her mind with fear and dread. And then everything went black. Ella awoke to find herself in a different room, the walls made of shadows, the floor beneath her cold and damp. The air was thick with the scent of decay, and the darkness was complete, save for a faint, flickering light in the distance. She sat up, her head spinning, her mind foggy. The last thing she remembered was reading the book, the words pulling her in like a vortex. But now she was here, in this strange, shadowy place, with no idea how she had gotten there. "Ella. I've been waiting for you," the woman's voice whispered, though she was no longer in the room. Ella's breath caught in her throat as she stood, her eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of the woman, or of a way out. But there was nothing, only the faint light in the distance, beckoning her forward. She took a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest, the shadows swirling around her like a living thing. The air was thick with tension, the silence oppressive as if the very walls were holding their breath. "Ella, come to me," the voice whispered, though it was no longer the woman's voice. It was deeper, darker, filled with a malevolence that made her skin crawl. Ella's breath caught in her throat as she realized that she was no longer alone in the shadows. Something was watching her, something that wasn't human, something that wanted her for reasons she couldn't fathom. She turned, her heart racing, but there was nothing there, only the darkness, the shadows, and the faint light in the distance. "Ella, you can't escape," the voice whispered, though it was no longer a whisper. It was a growl, a low, rumbling sound that sent shivers down her spine. Ella's breath caught in her throat as she realized that the shadows themselves were moving, shifting, taking on a life of their own. They seemed to pulse with a dark, malevolent energy, as if they were alive, as if they were hunting her. She turned and ran, her feet pounding on the cold, damp floor, the shadows closing in around her like a net. The light in the distance grew brighter, but it was still far away, too far to reach before the shadows caught her. "Ella, you belong to me now," the voice growled, the words echoing through the darkness like a death knell. Ella's heart pounded in her chest as she ran, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. The shadows seemed to be gaining on her, their darkness swirling around her like a living thing, their presence suffocating. And then she saw it, a door standing open in the darkness, its frame glowing faintly in the dim light. It was her only hope, her only chance to escape the shadow's grip. She sprinted towards it, her heart pounding in her chest, the shadows closing in behind her like a storm. The door loomed larger and larger, until she could see the light beyond, a warm, welcoming glow that called to her like a siren's song. But as she reached for the doorknob, something grabbed her from behind, its grip like iron, its breath cold and foul against her neck. Ella's scream echoed through the darkness, but it was too late. The shadows had her, and there was nothing she could do to escape. Ella's scream echoed through the mansion, bouncing off the walls like a haunting melody. The old house seemed to shudder, as if it had been holding its breath for centuries, waiting for this moment. The woman stood in the shadows, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, her presence filling the room with an eerie, almost palpable energy. She watched as Ella struggled against the shadow's grip, her eyes wide with fear, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "Ella, you should have never come here," the woman whispered, her voice like a melody, yet filled with a sorrow that cut deeper than any blade. Ella's eyes locked with hers, fear and confusion swirling in their depths. "What do you want from me?" she gasped, her voice trembling. The woman's smile was sad, almost pitying, as if she had seen this moment coming from the beginning of time. "You have the power to see what others cannot, Ella. The power to hear the whispers in the shadows." Ella's breath caught in her throat. "Whispers? What whispers?" The woman's gaze softened, and she took a step closer, her presence filling the room with an eerie, otherworldly energy. "The shadows have been waiting for you, Ella. They have been whispering your name for centuries, waiting for the day you would come." Ella's mind raced, trying to make sense of the woman's words, but fear and confusion clouded her thoughts. "What do you mean? What have I done?" The woman's smile faded, and her eyes darkened as if a storm was brewing behind them. "You have unleashed something ancient, Ella. Something that should have remained buried in the darkness." Ella's breath caught in her throat as she realized the gravity of the situation. The book, the whispers, the shadows, everything was connected, part of a dark, ancient power that she had inadvertently unleashed. "Please? I didn't mean to," Ella began, but the woman cut her off with a raised hand. "It's too late, Ella. The shadows have claimed you and there is no going back." Ella's heart pounded in her chest as she struggled against the shadow's grip, but it was useless. The darkness was too strong, too powerful, and she was trapped, caught in its web like a fly in a spider's web. The woman's gaze softened and she reached out, her hand brushing against Ella's cheek in a gesture of sorrowful goodbye. "Farewell, Ella. The shadows will be your new home." Ella's scream echoed through the mansion as the shadows closed in, their darkness swallowing her whole, leaving nothing but the faint echo of her fear in the air. The woman stood in the shadows, her eyes glowing with an otherworldly light, as she watched the darkness consume Ella. And then, with a soft, sorrowful smile, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the shadows like a ghost. The mansion was silent once more, the only sound the distant creak of the old wooden floors, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for the next soul to be claimed by the shadows. The sun rose over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the sleepy town, but the mansion remained shrouded in darkness, its walls holding the secrets of centuries. The invitation had been sent to Ella, but she was not the first, nor would she be the last. The woman, known only as the Keeper, had watched over the mansion for generations, waiting for those who were curious, those who sought to uncover the truths hidden within its walls. And each time the shadows had claimed them, their souls lost to the darkness, their memories erased from the world. But this time was different. Ella had been special, her curiosity and courage unmatched, and the Keeper had known that she would be the one to break the curse, to free the shadows from their eternal prison. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the mansion seemed to breathe a sigh of relief, the darkness lifting, the shadows receding into the walls, their whispers fading into silence. The Keeper stood in the shadows, her eyes filled with sorrow, as she watched the mansion return to its peaceful slumber. Ella was gone, claimed by the shadows, but her sacrifice had been necessary. The curse had been broken, the shadows freed, and the mansion was at peace once more. The Keeper turned and walked away, her presence fading into the shadows like a ghost, leaving nothing but the faint echo of her sorrow in the air. And as the sun climbed higher, the mansion stood silent, its walls holding the secrets of centuries, waiting for the next soul to be claimed by the shadows. The mansion stood silent, its walls holding the secrets of centuries, waiting for the next soul to be claimed by the shadows. But for now it was at peace, the darkness lifted, the shadows receded into the walls, their whispers fading into silence. Ella was gone, claimed by the shadows, but her sacrifice had been necessary. The curse had been broken, the shadows freed, and the mansion was at peace once more. The Keeper stood in the shadows, her eyes filled with sorrow, as she watched the mansion return to its peaceful slumber. She knew that she would never see Ella again, that her soul had been taken by the shadows, but she also knew that the mansion was safe, that the curse had been lifted. And as the sun climbed higher, the mansion stood silent, its walls holding the secrets of centuries, waiting for the next soul to be claimed by the shadows. But for now it was at peace. The whispers in the shadows will always call to those who are curious. But beware, for the price of curiosity is steep. Subscribe to Night Story for more spine-tingling tales that will keep you up all night.